You really think you want to meet an alien? For real? Okay, so let's just like play with that. So let's leave out the terrifying tiny little gray aliens because they scare the hell out of everyone, apparently. People can't deal with being stared at by these beings. Literally every single abduction account says the same thing. But let's just say it's a nice looking human Pleiadian, blonde hair, supermodel. Okay, great. We're like, yeah, we're down with that. No, I don't think so. First of all, great way to get an inferiority complex. Especially not only when they look better than you, but they can live 3 times longer, probably. And they're probably 3 times smarter or 4 times smarter. And probably they've got telepathic capabilities so they can get inside every little secret buried in our minds. And they may not laugh at all of our stupid jokes. And imagine sitting across from one in a room, just you and that alien, and he's staring at you. I don't think that would go down very well with a lot of people. I think many people would be very unnerved.
Welcome. I'm here with the great Richard Dolan. Richard, very much appreciate having on your show. My audience has actually been widely anticipating this because I've been selling it a little bit.
Well, Thank you. Hi, Sean. It's great to be here, and the audience should know that we just were chit-chatting for about the last 25 minutes about all kinds of things. I don't even think we realized we were just slipping into some great conversations there.
Yeah, this topic is rabbit hole after rabbit hole after rabbit hole.
Yes.
So we should probably start from the top in terms of what do you think is at the highest level is going on with disclosure right now from the perspective of the national security state? What do you think? Are there multiple factions? Is it just an orchestrated play to slowly move disclosure? Or is this just, we're just going to put out a bunch of noise, flood the zone with disinformation and hope people just go away?
I don't think this is a single orchestrated play from any one faction. I do think that there are people out there right now who have different motivations and different objectives that they want. I definitely do think that there are certain members of Congress who are trying. I don't know that they have a lot of belief that they will have success. I'm thinking of people like Tim Burchett or Anna Paulina Luna, Eric Burleson, a lot of these folks in Congress. I think that their motivations are good, seems to me, and that furthermore, I don't think that I don't get the idea that they think that they're likely to get a lot of success. This has always been my impression anytime that I've either spoken with them or spoken with their people or whatever. So, but I think that they believe in what they're doing insofar as they're able to make this issue work for them politically. I think they're willing to push it. And, and I think it's also true that there are, let's say, faction within the establishment of the Department of Defense, that would include the Arrow office itself and a lot of other individuals of the intelligence community that absolutely do not want this information coming out any more than it has already come out. I don't think there's any question in my mind about that. I mean, I
think Arrow is a classic counterintelligence operation. It's like a Venus flytrap. They just want to see who comes out, raises their hand, and then they lock them up, right? Or they...
Well, that would be a pretty nasty bait and switch, but maybe that is what they are doing. I tend to think that go back to 2017. So Elizondo comes out, we first meet Lou Elizondo. And we had to watch for 2 or 3 years in a row while the Pentagon just smeared that man. They went after him again and again and again. He didn't work for ATIP. Yes, he actually did. He didn't work for OSAP or ATIP. He wasn't who he said he was. And there was all kinds of statements about him that were not true. They were not true statements. The history of OSAP and ATIP, I will say, was a little more complex than we were initially led to believe. But no, he's a straight shooting guy. But, it took 2 years for the Department of Defense to authenticate the videos that were released, that Lou and Chris Mellon got released. Those 3, the Tic Tac, the Gimbal, and the Go Fast video. Those were... It certainly seems to me that Mellon and Lou were very clever in how they got those videos declassified. And it's very obvious that once they got them declassified, the Pentagon was not happy about that, and the Navy was not happy. And it took them several years to admit that those things were legitimate. So, no, I think there's been a lot of obstruction right from the beginning. And factional wars are an old game when it comes to UFOs or anything within the Pentagon.
When the United States and China clash, the world will never be the same, especially when forces beyond reality threaten to intervene. What if the United States went to war with the People's Republic of China? How would these rivals fight for supremacy on land, sea, air, and across the stochastic streams of time? What wonder weapons would be unleashed? What horrors would emerge from the irradiated sludge of the South China Sea? What heroes would rise and forever change the course of history? Tread into the deepest and darkest dimensions of the multiverse, gaze through a kaleidoscope of fractured realities, and bear witness to the disturbing visions of World War III from today's greatest minds in science fiction, fantasy, and horror. Weird World War, China. Available now from Baen Books at Baen.com.
You think of the rivalry of the Navy and the Air Force, just for starters. It's gone for decades, and that includes over the UFO issue. You go back into the old literature of this subject, the old books by Donald Kehoe, former Marine, tight with all the Navy guys back in the 50s and 60s. Kehoe was in a really good position to understand a lot of this, and he spoke of all kinds of factions within the Pentagon. And there were always people within the military, high levels, some of them, who really did believe in some amount of UFO openness, or what we would call disclosure. They existed in the 50s and 60s, and they fought and they basically lost, but they were there. And so I don't think that that faction's ever really gone away. And I think what we ended up seeing in 2017 and beyond is simply that faction was given certain tools that allowed them to succeed better. We've had internet. We have vastly better ways of communicating and coordinating information. And I had really believed for many, many years before 2017 that something like this was probably inevitable, that the trajectory of our own society and our ever greater levels of communication on this type of subject where we're sharing information. I mean, you could see this kind of slow crescendo of UFO in the culture through the 21st century. Even when it seemed like it was going nowhere, it actually wasn't. I think there was a slow build, and it just led to a kind of a breakout moment in 2017 where that faction was able to get Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal of the New York Times to put an article out, and they kind of broke it open. And even that was not a given. You know, there was a lot of resistance at the New York Times hierarchy. And in fact, to the point where even in the first articles, they were forced to bring in skeptical opinions just to kind of balance out the article. So, no, I think what we're looking at is kind of a battle, a war going on between two different factions. I think, you know, we can call it a disclosure faction or a transparency faction and a secrecy faction. I don't think that's changed. And I expect the secrecy faction to continue to do very well what they've been doing. I mean, we've had some unbelievable breakthroughs in the last several years. Think about David Grush. When we first learned about him 2 years ago, it was kind of a mind-blowing experience. It's easy for people to say, oh, he didn't say anything new. He said a lot that was new, at least to the general
under
public.
Oath. Well, yeah. It was
under oath? Under oath, yes. Yeah. To live session of Congress.
And most people still don't know the revelations that he put out.
He was in a fantastic position to say what he had to say. Yeah. And you would think, like most, in a rational world, you would think that would prompt disclosure, or at least enough of an outcry in the public that it would force some forward motion here. And nothing happened. I mean, basically nothing happened at all. So, you know, never underestimate the ability of this establishment to continue to maintain control over this narrative. And they've done a great job. And I would expect the Luna Committee, I'm hoping they're not set up for failure, because it seems to me that they might be. But nonetheless, I'm rooting for them. And I would like to see something, whether it's UFOs or USOs. They've got both of those in there. Or JFK or Martin Luther King Jr. or COVID. Yes, let's get something on COVID. I would love to see that. 9/11, of course. But that's a lot. That's a lot of mandate right there. And I'm just afraid that they're not that is probably going to be too much. But if they get even one good breakthrough, I'll be happy. But I don't think it's going to make a huge difference in the near future.
To advertise on Through a Glass Darkly, email throughaglassdarkly@gmail.com.
All right, now you mentioned these factional warfare. Let's go all the way back. Maybe not too far back, but what happened to Admiral Forrestal?
I think James Forrestal was murdered. I will always believe that. So James Forrestal was the first Secretary of Defense in American history. After we did the reorg in 1947, go from the Department of War to the Department of Defense.
It's also interesting timing, too. 1947, the National Security Act, July 1947. Yeah. Right. Same month as Roswell.
Same.
Interesting.
Yes, it was the same month as Roswell. Although, it's important to add that National Security Act had been in the works for some time. There was a lot of talk about doing a reorg of the military community, all of that. The services basically needed to be kind of coordinated better, and that's what that was ultimately that did. So Forrestal became the first Sec Def, and he was a Navy guy. He had been Assistant Secretary of the Navy during the war, and then at the end of the war gets promoted to Secretary of the Navy. That was his service that he loved, and he now becomes Secretary of Defense, and everything starts going sideways for this guy. And he made the grave mortal sin of cozying up to Republican presidential candidate Thomas Dewey in 1948, when Truman
defeats Truman, right?
Truman was his guy, and Forrestal went behind Truman's back. Truman never forgave that. And after Truman won his impossible reelection, he brought Forrestal in pretty soon after that and said, "You're going to be gone. So I don't trust you. You're gone." But the thing is that Forrestal had a lot of political enemies. He was certainly followed. He had talked about being followed by strange-looking men. He actually said this. The Secretary of the Air Force, Stuart Symington, and he were absolute mortal enemies, it seems like, politically. But what ended up happening was Forrestal, after all that, he gets this going away gala in March 1st of 1949. And the crazy thing is that after that ceremony, he comes out of wherever this took place, I can't remember, and Stuart Symington, his enemy, is waiting for him in a limo. He says, "I'd like to talk with you privately." So on the drive back to Forrestal's office at the Pentagon, it is not known what Symington said or did to James Forrestal. But what did happen next is that Forrestal was next seen in his office. He had been in there for a while, apparently. Secretary finally knocks on the door, opens the door, and he's sitting ramrod straight in his chair, looking straight ahead at nothing, repeating one sentence over and over again. This is absolutely true. "You are a loyal fellow." That's what he kept saying. "You are a loyal fellow." So he was out of it. And everyone realized, this guy, we got to do something about him because he's got all kinds of secrets. He was Secretary of Defense. We cannot let this. And who knows what he knew about UFOs? He certainly knew a lot about the Russians, the communists, right? That whole thing that was big. So all of the handlers get hold of him and they fly him to Florida, where he is sedated, tries to kill himself, supposedly. Why?
Supposedly.
Why?
Right.
They bring in a high-level psychiatrist by the name of Menninger to check him out. Forrestal is not happy there. A friend of his, a future Secretary of Defense named Robert Lovett, came to see him. And Forrestal, first words he said to Lovett were, "Bob, they're trying to kill me." Literal first words. So anyway, they take him out of Florida. They bring him up to Bethesda Naval Hospital in Maryland. And against all of the advice of the attending physicians, they said, because if he's suicidal, he should be on the first floor. No, the Washington insiders put him up on the 16th floor, the VIP suite. But anyway, so Forrestal was there for 6 weeks, almost completely incommunicado. A few people visited him. Truman did. The new Sec Def, Lewis Johnson, did. A young guy by the name of John F. Kennedy did. Another guy by the name of Lyndon Johnson did. They all saw Forrestal. But his brother, Henry, was not allowed to see him, and nor was his reverend, Father something Sheehy, a Monsignor Sheehy, Who in a hospital is not allowed to see their priest or their rabbi or their spiritual leader? Forrestal wasn't. That's who. So anyway, he's locked up there. He starts making friends with one of the Navy corpsmen who's guarding him. They were in shifts of 8 hours. One of them became like his like little protege, I guess. And Forrestal's saying to this guy, hey, when I'm out, you're going to have a job working for me. So he was looking ahead to all of that. On the day before Forrestal died, which was the night of May 22nd, 1949, his brother, Henry, was getting really, really, really ticked off because Henry had been trying to see his brother. He kept getting denied. So he checks into the hotel, the Mayflower Hotel, I can't remember. And he calls the hospital from the hotel and he says, I am coming tomorrow to get my brother out of that hospital. And damn it, you are not going to stop me. And if you try, I will raise holy hell with all the media. You're going to hear it from me. So that's what Henry Forrestal said. That night was when his brother did a 16th floor bungee jump out the window. So what actually happened that night? So the midnight shift, which was when Forrestal's favorite security guy was supposed to have the shift, for whatever reason, that guy went AWOL, we're told, and he wasn't there. So they put in a new guy. Yeah, a new guard by the name of Harrison. And by the way, when I wrote about this in my first book, I think the grandson of that guy wrote to me. He was really angry that I had somehow implicated his grandfather. So look, I'm just trying to tell the story the way it looks like it is. So Forrestal, it's 1:30 in the morning. I hope I'm not telling this too long here. It's 1:30 in the morning. He's in his bed, and the security guard opens the door, apparently, and just to check on him. And he sees that secretary was in bed, and he was reading a book. He was actually transcribing something out of a book, Anthology of World Literature. So 15 minutes later, according to the official story, that same corpsman came in to check on the secretary, and he said he was gone. I don't know where he went. Oh, he must have gone out the window in the hallway here. There was a tiny little window. In front of this window was a radiator, the old-fashioned radiators that would... So you'd have to open up this window, and it was not very large, but out that window, you go down to 16 floors. You fall to your death. So according to the official story, Forrestal stopped in the middle of writing a word, not even a sentence, writing a word, stopped writing in the middle of a word, and suddenly decided that he had to kill himself that very instant. And that he got up, he took his bathrobe cord off his bathrobe, tied it, one end very tightly around his neck, and the other end rather loosely around the radiator. Why the hell would you do this? So his idea was he was going to hang himself in the most cockamamie way ever devised. No, I don't think anyone has ever hanged themselves in this manner ever. I cannot believe it. So according to the official story, the cord was not tied tightly enough to the radiator, so it came undone, and he just fell to his death.
Did he have signature marks on his neck, regardless?
Well, there were scuff marks on the outside of the window. They were able to find scuff marks. So if he had decided to jump out, he very quickly, immediately, instantaneously changed his mind. What ended up happening, what I think is most likely what happened is that he was murdered. And Forrestal was not a big guy. I mean, he did play football in college, but that was a long time ago. He was not a big guy. You've got this young 20-something Navy guy who's obviously going to be able to overwhelm him and just threw him out the window. That's what I think.
Strangled him first and then threw him.
Yes, yeah, that was tied very tightly around his neck. Very, very tightly. Yeah.
Did you research the background of this Harrison fella?
Robert Harrison. No, I should have. No, I didn't. When I wrote about this was almost 30 years ago, so it was a little harder. I hadn't really thought it might be possible to find more about him, what his career was, what he ended up doing. I do know there was an investigation called the Willicuts investigation But this is 14 years before JFK was assassinated. So, like, the Navy says this is a suicide. No one in the United States was going to question that. So this was just a bunch of formalities. So they bring some people in for questioning, including Harrison, this guy. And I've read the transcript, years ago. He had to be in there no more than 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes. A couple of quick questions. Okay, you're done. Goodbye. So it was very perfunctory. And they obviously were not looking for anything to contradict their story. Why would they ever want a story that the secretary was murdered? That would be a nightmare for them. So they just said, well, suicide. And then the real question about Forrestal, though, is why? Why would he have been murdered? And the reason that I looked into it at all 30 years ago is because maybe there was a UFO connection. And I still think that's quite likely. We don't really know.
Is this related to Majestic 12?
Yeah, possibly. I'm someone who actually, I do believe in some kind of majestic organization or zodiac. Maybe that's what we're calling it now. But Forrestal, he's listed, of course, as one of, I think he's MJ3 on the document. But even if someone doesn't believe in Majestic 12, Forrestal would have been right dead center of all of this. He was Secretary of Defense during the period that these flying saucers were really getting a lot of attention in the media and within the military. There was lots of UFO sightings in 47, 48, 49, very much so. So he would have been right on top of that. And, it's one of the elephants in the room that you really have to ask yourself. It was a very, very big thing. The real question is, was Forrestal considered unreliable? This is what I really think. Like, here's a guy who had privy to untold numbers of very sensitive national security secrets, including the UFO issue. And then, he's thrown out of a window. Why? Well, I think he was considered unreliable. Mm-hmm. Partly because I think he was considered a political enemy of Truman by that time. Truman was, outwardly friendly to him, but no, I think they did not get along at all toward the end. I think Truman felt betrayed, and I think he just lost trust. I'm not saying Harry Truman ordered the murder of Forrestal. I would not think so. I don't know who ordered it, but I think Forrestal was murdered, yeah, for sure.
And then kind of the same thing when we're talking about the factions who are pro-anti-disclosure. What do you think is behind all this? In other words, the Cold War has been over for over 30 years. Why are we still keeping this secret? Is it something that's so horrible and earth-shattering that the mere disclosure of it would cause collapse of civilization? Because that would be the only reason I would think would be halfway reasonable. And even then.
I don't think it's hard to understand. I think if you're trying to weaponize the technology, if you're trying to make money out of the technology, you've got a secret goose that lays golden eggs. And why would you want to share that? I often think you wind back the clock to the 1940s and put yourself in Truman's place. So, your top people come to you and say, yes, we have acquired technology that does not come from our civilization, and a couple of bodies, by the way. So you've got this awesome piece of information to work with. Do you share it with the world? You might want to. I could easily imagine Harry Truman would have moments where he would think, yeah, I should share this. Truman was not like an aristocrat. He was a regular guy who worked his way up in politics. He really was, you could say he was like a man of the people. I don't think he was an anti-democratic kind of a person.
Well, he was from the same state as the Camp Girardeau crash, too. That was
Missouri.
Right?
Yeah, that's right.
So he may have known about that, too.
He may have. He may not have, though. Truman didn't know about the atomic bomb until 1945. So it's possible he was not let in originally on these secrets. But my point is simply that Truman might want to share this, but there would be too many people around him to say that is a bad idea. That is a very bad idea. You got the Russians over there. They're going to want this technology. They're trying to get our nuclear secrets, and we don't want them to get that. How could we possibly let them have something as exotic as ET tech? So, no, it's not hard to see why they would start the secret. And it's not hard to see why it would continue, because it's tremendous power in there. And there's money. These guys, who are high-level military, they're involved in keeping it secret. Then they retire, and they go work for these these contractors, and they make more money than they've ever made before, and they get better clearances than they've ever gotten before in the private sector. So it's a really great system for those people, and I see no motivation. And then the other problem is, the longer this secret goes, the harder it becomes to just fess up without someone looking really bad and vulnerable. And I don't know who those vulnerable people would be. Look, it's been 60 plus years after JFK's assassination, and they still cannot come clean on that. Because there are people who would be implicated.
I think I made one of my previous guests a little nervous once. They were a proponent of amnesty. And I said,
amnesty for UFO secrets?
Secrets, crimes, like murdering people, stuff like that.
Okay.
I mean, he didn't specify, but, he's just like the people who provide amnesty. And I just kind of said, I have an alternative. Why don't you offer someone $20 million to come out, rat all of his friends, and problem solved? You could tell he was like, how come nobody had ever, I hope that doesn't go, that idea doesn't go too far, but why not?
No, it's actually, I think it's a good idea, but would it really fly legally? Just someone's accusation. I mean, there would be suspicion on those people, but it wouldn't be the same as proof, would it?
No, but what it does is it enforces a prisoner's dilemma on that entire population.
True.
Right? And the optimal strategy in a prisoner's dilemma is to defect.
Yeah.
So.
No, I hear you. I think actually that would be a good strategy, at least one tactic that could be used.
The problem, though, is the people who have the power to do that are the people. What's that?
Find a stool pigeon.
Yeah, exactly. The problem, though, is the people who have the power to make that happen are the people who are keeping the secret. So
yeah. And I think there's just a lot of we haven't even scratched the surface of why there is secrecy. I mean, let's get. I know we'll talk about my recent book a little later, but in my book on USOs, I found innumerable cases where these objects are able to essentially disable United States aircraft carriers for certain periods of time, and also Soviet ships. So there's a lot of capability. We hear about them doing this with nuclear missile weapons. Well, they can do it with big ships as well. And so if you're the Navy or if you're the Pentagon, how in God's name would you ever want to acknowledge that that's the case, that there is a phenomenon out here, you have no defense against it. There's nothing you can do about it. They do whatever they want. I mean, you could eventually maybe do that. Maybe the mass of the public would be understanding. But from the point of view of these military guys, the admirals and the generals, I cannot imagine that they would ever want to admit this. And also, we don't really know. I don't know. I've been doing this for 30 years. I don't know anyone who actually knows how deep this actually goes. It's like, we get disclosure. What does that actually mean? The president. So now it's Trump. So he comes up and says, yeah, it's real and they're here. He can't just leave it at that. There's like a lot of explaining to do here.
Yeah. Do we have treaties? How many races are there? Where are they from?
Absolutely. Do we have the ability to go to warp 9? Have we replicated any of that stuff? Is there a free energy solution? That sounds really great. We would all love free energy, but it would be very disruptive to our world. It would create a lot of volatility in the world. Oh, yeah. And even under the best conditions.
I'll give you an example. Let's say you had free energy, totally pollutionless, everything's great. I run a labor company in the Amazon. I'm cutting down trees 24/7, just nonstop, right? So you could have rapid deforestation. Just again.
Yes, exactly. Really exactly. Right. Absolutely. We think, oh yeah, energy is great. Yeah, energy. We had free energy. It was called petroleum. For all intents and purposes, when we started getting oil out of the ground almost 200 years ago, Titusville, Pennsylvania, 1859 is when they dug the first well there. That was so cheap. You might as well have made it free. It had a lot of BTUs. You get a lot of energy out of petroleum. Did a great job. Yeah, it had some environmental effects, which back then no one cared about, but it allowed us to do everything we wanted. And what do we do with it? Well, we chopped down half all the forests and we made really good war on each other. We did all kinds of things with that energy. So you give us free energy, an infinite supply, Yeah, so you're not polluting. Well, good for us. We'll do everything else that we've been wanting to do, including terraforming the world and, continuing on with Earth's sixth great extinction event, which we are living in right now.
Yeah, that raises another theory, right? The only species that survive, because I think there's already been six. This might be
No, we are in the sixth.
Six.
So there's been
Okay. Five major.
The dinosaurs were one. The Permian extinction was one, and there were a bunch of others. We are in number 6.
The species that survive those mass extinctions are, what the one characteristic they all have?
They were little.
Burrowing species. They go to ground.
Yeah, like the early mammals, yeah. Some birds survived, the late Cretaceous extinction, but no, I think you've got a really good point. And no apex predators. They don't survive that. That means us. We cannot live separately from the rest of the world's environment. We like to pretend we can, but we cannot. It's not possible. So yeah, we're in the 6th great extinction now. I mean, every scientist who's looked at this will say that species extinctions are like anywhere from 100 to 1,000 times the normal rate. And this is much faster than like even with the dinosaurs or most other great extinction events take hundreds of thousands of years. We're doing ours in decades.
What's your best theory about what's going on with the phenomena, the extraterrestrial hypothesis?
I believe, so have they been here a long time? When we say they, we want to be clear what we mean, but has some non-human intelligence been monitoring us for a long time? I think probably yes. I say probably because I think a lot of the early evidence is. Yeah, I think a lot of the evidence is weaker than people want to admit, frankly. But some of it is good, I think. At least it's suggestive. But there's no question that there have been at least 2 jumps in this. One, I think, happened during the 19th century, where when I'm tracking these cases, there were quite a few in the 19th century, at least compared to earlier eras. So I think something started there, and then absolutely, positively during and after World War II. That's the big one. And I think we got the attention of, several groups in the neighborhood, so to speak. I think they're here. Why? Well,
radio signals.
They may have known about us all along, but it's us. I think it's us. We're doing our hyperbolic exponential rocket ship to outer space, and we're in the course of one and a half centuries, we go from basically living in wooden huts and animal power for everything to railroads, to automobiles, to aircraft, to missiles, to atomic weapons, to computers, to AI, and everything else that we've got. I mean, it's within like 5 or 6 generations. So super fast. Unbelievably fast. So I think we got their attention. So they know, okay, these humans, they've discovered advanced mathematics and science and metallurgy, and like they've got it now. They're in the groove. They're developing fast. So do we want to check them out? And it looks like they're in the process of wiping out, probably 3/4 of all life on the planet. So maybe we should go take a look. And I think that's what's happening. I think they're examining us. And are they trying to influence us? Maybe. They may. There may be ways that they're doing that. I've gone back and forth on that. But I think they're definitely here. They're engaged. They are clearly, when you look at the sightings, they are global. They're every day around the world. Good sightings. So they're active. This is important to them. And I don't know if it's one them or many thems, but it's important to them. I suspect that there's more than one group because they look like it's more than one group, at least going by what people are saying and people who claim that they've been in contact with them. Many of them look human, so some of them don't look human. So, yeah, they're here because what's happening right now in our world, I think, is very interesting, is very significant. We have an amazing planet. I mean, we have a super abundance of life and genetic diversity. I'm sure other planets, do very well that are out there, but it's not like planets like ours are a dime a dozen. I think, they're rare enough that they will get attention. So I think that's what's happening. And we're in the process of, this is like our high wire tightrope act. This is what we're doing. So we start at one end, and we have to get over this very, very high tightrope to the other end. And if we make it,
right? The great filter.
If we make it, we may be okay, but we may fall. There's nothing assured about our survival for the next few centuries. I don't think it's a done deal. I mean, I tend to think we'll find a way to muddle through, but I don't really know. And maybe they don't know either. So I think this is a really interesting show. I certainly do not think that they, by and large, want any kind of real open contact with us. I think that's the last thing that they want. We haven't really been able to establish that. And I think that when I look at the behavior of the encounters that people, whether military or not military, having, it's kind of all the same. They come, they check us out, they go on their way. They're doing things that I would consider very creepy. There's a lot of UFO story, UAP accounts, where someone will say, I couldn't sleep, I went out, it's 2 a.m, and I saw a black triangle hovering 100 feet over my neighbor's house. Or a saucer, it could be a rounded object. They're just hanging out there. Easy to miss. What are they doing over someone's house? Well, are they doing an abduction? I don't know. Maybe. They're doing things that are important for them that they are not interested in telling us about. So, this is where the rubber meets the road. We talk about disclosure, we talk about transparency. To me, that's still a very safe conversation. That's the safe part. Where it becomes very interesting is when we start getting real with this and asking, who are these guys? Where do they come from? What do they want, or what does it look like what they want?
And why are they hiding?
Where are they hiding? Maybe 5 miles under the ground from your house, for all we know. They could have a base anywhere. That's another reason where I often think, who would want to disclose? So Trump's on the podium and he's doing disclosure, let's just say. It may come up. Are there alien bases? At some point, if not that night, some night, soon after, someone's going to ask, got alien bases? Where are they? Well, what if they know and they don't want to say? Because what if some of them are inside the United States or in some other country? It almost doesn't matter because it's near where someone lives. Someone's going to live there. Unless they're truly out in the middle of under the floor of the Atlantic Ocean, the Puerto Rico Trench, or, inside some mountain. But they could be much closer than that. And all of these things would be very unnerving. And here's the other thing. I talk to people frequently enough who will say, I would love to meet an alien. And I'm thinking, really? You really think you want to meet an alien? For real? Okay, so let's just play with that. So let's leave out the terrifying tiny little gray aliens because they scare the hell out of everyone, apparently. People can't deal with being stared at by these beings. Literally every single abduction account says the same thing. But let's just say it's a nice looking human, Pleiadian, blonde hair, supermodel. Okay, great. We're we're down with that. No, I don't think so. First of all, great way to get an inferiority complex. Mm-hmm. Especially not only when they look better than you, but they can live 3 times longer, probably. And they're probably 3 times smarter or 4 times smarter. And probably they've got telepathic capabilities so they can get inside every little secret buried in our minds. And they may not laugh at all of our stupid jokes. And imagine sitting across from one in a room, just you and that alien, and he's staring at you. I don't think that would go down very well with a lot of people. I think many people would be very unnerved by that. And I think we would have a hard time. I remember something Whitley Strieber wrote years ago. I told him about this. He couldn't remember it, but I remember it. Around 2010, he wrote an article where he's talking about how he says we would have a very difficult time psychologically dealing with them. We would be like a cowering dog that's afraid of its master. He says that's really what you're dealing with. We like to think that we're all that and that we can handle everything, but I don't know. The more I look into this, the less I'm sure about that. I'm not saying that we should all chicken out and run and hide. No, I think we need to know what is going on in this world. I do believe that. But I'm just saying we should be careful what we ask for. Because one day we're going to get it.
Yeah, I'm not sure what people are encountering. And actually, that was my next question. There's a lot of, let's call it lore, about historical agreements and things like that. Having done deep dives on the historical evidence, what do you say about that? I think there's like a report about it, like Eisenhower meeting, things like that. What's the...
Yeah. That's a good one to talk about. For whatever reason, earlier this week, I was actually revisiting that on my own. And
Richard, that's called a synchronicity, and I have those things constantly.
Yeah.
Constantly.
3 or 4 days ago, I was doing my own little dive back into that. It's an interesting story. Like, in fact, what I was trying to figure out was how did that story first originate? For years, I had mistakenly thought that it came from the radio broadcaster Frank Edwards, who was like the original Art Bell and George Norrie. And I've looked and looked and looked, and I've looked for years, and I'm now convinced that Frank Edwards had nothing to do with it, although there's a part of me that for some reason thought that he did. Anyway, in 1954...
If there was a guy that to put out a story like that, it would be Frank Edwards, right?
Yeah. Frank Edwards, for people who don't know, he was a late-night radio guy in the 1950s and 60s, and he talked about UFOs. Like, he was the guy who did that, and he was very well-connected. I think he was a good guy, and I think he was genuinely interested in this. But anyway, no, I guess he didn't. If someone listening knows how I could connect Frank Edwards to this, please write a comment below. I will look for it. But anyway, what is true is that in February of 1954, Dwight Eisenhower did go to Edwards Air Force Base. He did go missing for a period of time, and he was briefly, mistakenly reported as deceased by the Associated Press. Believe it or not, they retracted it almost immediately. There was a report that he had died. He had only been president for a year. This is like early on. Anyway, then the story was he had a dental emergency and he had to have a dentist deal with some crisis. The researcher Bill Moore looked into this, as I recall, and I can't remember what the conclusion on this one is. I should go back, but basically, I think something did happen at Edwards. There's a strange letter. No one's been able to authenticate it, by a guy named Gerald Light. He was this metaphysical guy in California in the 50s. And, he actually wrote a couple of books, so he was known in his field. He's not famous. So anyway, a letter of his from 1954 is available. You can search it out. It was written to another metaphysical organization that he was friends with. And he's talking about having been with a priest and another, maybe a rabbi. I'm trying to remember, a couple of religious...
Was that organization BSRA?
Yes.
There we go. Yeah.
I think so. I think it had an acronym. So maybe I don't want to say absolutely yes. Anyone watching this is a quick Google. Type in the Gerald Light letter, and there's a PDF that discusses the organization that accepted it. And I can't remember it off the top of my head. If you're looking, you can find it. But anyway, the point is that organization, I really tried to get to the bottom of this, and it's not 100% clear that letter has been knowingly in circulation all this time, but it is, I think it seems like it's highly probable that this is a legit letter. That's how I look at this letter. It looks much more legit than not to me. And so I think, based on this,
according to ChatGPT, Gerald Light's letter was addressed to Maid Lane.
That's right.
Director of the Borderland Sciences Research.
Okay.
Associates.
You and I were talking about this before.
Yeah.
Okay. And by the way, you can discuss this if you want, but there were a couple of other synchronistic things going on in that conversation. So this is just yet another. That's weird.
That's normal for me.
Yes.
That's
Gerald Light wrote to that organization. And holy crap.
Yeah. Welcome
Yeah,
to
so
my
anyway.
world, Richard. I told you stuff as soon as I started following this stuff. I told you about the owls. My audience knows all about the owls. There's also
Crazy.
the synchronicities, and then there's another thing I'll tell you off on the side.
Well, I'll just let's put a little, tie this up in a bow and be done with it. So I think like that bit of lore, I think I believe it. I think Eisenhower had some kind of meeting with, ETs and all of that. There's other lore. There's the Holloman landing of 1964, 10 years later. I do believe that one. I definitely believe that one. And there's some crazy lore like the Serpo story. I mean, that's...
I was going to ask you about that. I was going to ask you about
Really?
or is it Canadian Defense Minister? What's his name?
Paul Hellyer?
Hellyer, yeah. Okay. That story is crazy.
Did Hellyer believe in Serpo? Do you know if he did?
He's the one who talked about it, right?
No, I don't think so. Paul? I think he did. No, that came out... It was first... Well, I think it first made it out in... There was a guy named Victor Martinez who had a mailing list kind of a thing. And I think that was in 2005. And it immediately went on to Bill Ryan of Avalon, along with Kerry Cassidy. They hosted the Serpo letters on their site. And I think that's how we first learned about it.
Yeah, but ChatGPT says there's no evidence to suggest that he discussed it publicly, so I'm wrong on that one.
Yeah, I don't think he did.
Yeah.
Oh, Hellyer was an interesting man. I liked Paul Hellyer, and he was a fascinating guy. I once hung out with Hellyer in a beer-soaked tavern in Toronto where the Stones had once played. We did some UFO thing. The floors were sticky as hell. You didn't even want to know what was on the floors, but we were there, and Paul Hellyer, 6'5", 90-year-old man, was in the back of this tavern signing books. All these people. It was insane. It's insane. But anyway, the Serpo story, I mean, so for the people who don't know, so the idea is it was an astronaut exchange program, essentially. So human astronauts and alien astronauts, they would come here, we would go there, to their planet called Serpo. That's the thing. If you ever read the Serpo documents, they're fascinating to read. They're a damn good read. They're fun to read. So everyone's like, it's all BS.
The training. Have you recall like the training where they would bury people and they would have to I don't know, for some time period?
Yeah, well,
it was talk to somebody who's gone through SEER school.
So
I was interviewing.
Does it strike you as valid or as believable, at least in the rough edges here?
In terms of the training and the time period, I could see some of that, right?
Yeah, interesting.
But I didn't know about in SEER school. I've interviewed people who've said this out loud, so I guess I can. I've never been there. I haven't signed anything, but they put you in a box, right? Just a box, and they just see how much you can take. So
I think they were doing that at Edgewood Arsenal back in the 50s for MK Ultra experiments. They were fucking people up. Pardon my language.
Yeah, but it's not inconceivable that they would do that to get you used to being in a small confined space for a very long period of time. So
anyway, there's things about the Serpo story. I'm not going to dunk on Serpo. People are like, it's a hoax. It's a hoax. You hear this all the time. And in this field of ours, there's almost this tendency. I see it all the time. People are, the biggest fear that they have is being caught believing something that's not true. They would rather disbelieve everything rather than actually take a chance and think, that might be true. There's a lot of fear. They're all reputational damage. I understand. 30 plus years ago,
we just had the entire population believing that people got a life-threatening illness because other people were eating bats.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for mentioning this.
That's all I'm going to say.
There's one thing that I will never forgive, and I will never forgive the lockdowners and the forced vaccination people. I will not forgive. I never got a COVID vaccination. Never did. And you'd have to drag my dead body to the vaccination place to get it done. I would never do it. I got so angry over that, and I'm still angry about that. That to me, no. I can't get past that one. So
without going into it, because YouTube is,
no, you'll get in trouble.
Very, very fair and just when it comes to.
No, we love the YouTube gods. We love them.
Same as the old boss.
Yeah. So anyway, well, I don't know what to say about Serpo. Is such a, I mean, that's some heavy duty lore, and let's just put that in the gray basket, as Stanton Friedman used to say.
I think most everything in this topic is in the gray basket. I wouldn't have said that 5 years ago, but after, well, I'm not even going to mention the guy's name, but there's been people you would think were wackos, and then they're like, boom, 9/11, boom, like they're calling everything, and you're like, whoa, he's a little crazy, but he's right. So without calling out names, there's just a lot of people in the past who you would say, that's not real, that didn't happen. And then the more you dig, you're like,
yes.
What did Jackson say? President Jackson, to the victor goes the spoils.
Andrew Jackson, well, maybe. He brought on what was called the spoils system to American politics back in 1818. Yeah, back in 1824, I think was the year he got elected. Yeah, Jackson. 9/11, I just want to say this one last thing. Right. We're bouncing around here, but this is fun. I hope listeners are enjoying this. 9/11 was the event for me that truly pushed me over the edge. So I wrote my first UFO book in the year 2000. It was a year before 9/11. I was a self-published author and just kind of getting my feet wet. I was 38 years old at that time. And I had been, I'd had a good education, a very good formal academic education in areas of history and philosophy and a lot of things like that. And so I was well positioned to jump into the UFO field, I thought, because I had a good background. And I was comfortable in the world of conspiracies, even while I was writing my book in the 90s. But when 9/11 happened, 9/11 was on an order of magnitude beyond anything that I had in my life that I had experienced, because I was too young to understand the Kennedy assassination. Mm-hmm. And with 9/11, when it first happened that day, I was not thinking this was a setup. That took about a year.
I was in the Army. We were getting calls from wives who were scared to death. We were going to war. Like that.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Yeah.
And it took a while, but there was a guy named Terry Masson, I think it was, out of France. He did, in early 2002, he did, I think, the first kind of really critical look at some things that went wrong with 9/11. And people started writing to me early on, Richard, you need to look at 9/11. There's something wrong there. And my attitude was, I'll look at it when I get to it. I'm right. I was so new in the UFO field. It takes time. Like when you make a decision to go into something like that, you have got to be prepared to let go of your beliefs. And that's a scary.
I haven't touched that one, by the way. It's too dangerous.
Yeah, well, I did. I went there, and I can't undo it. Yeah. So I am one of those people, and I will believe to my dying breath that there was a conspiracy there. Now, since I wasn't part of the club, I can't know every detail about how it went down, but I will never, ever believe what I consider as the insulting fiction that we are told that it was. I don't believe it. No. So there was something wrong there, and I think it was basically a way to push the world, America and the world, closer to where they wanted it to be. Basically a totally integrated global system in which quaint things like human rights and your rights they go away because we're in a different world.
Keep the serfs productive.
Yeah. So that's what I think 9/11 was, personally.
All right. Any final words on the national security? Man, we are way over.
I'm sorry. I feel like
no. Trust me.
I went into too many different
we'll record the next episode, and it's late for you, but I am game off.
No, I'm having a good time.
So Anyway,
let me just say this. I'll say this last thing about UFOs or UAP. I got into it 30 plus years ago, thinking. Not even knowing. I thought, well, I got kind of intrigued by a very good book by Timothy Good called Above Top Secret. Yeah, I remember reading it.
Got that
it's a classic.
Yeah.
It's a classic. And, I was really deep into studying U.S. national security history at that time. And I feel like I was reading this alternate history by a very intelligent man. He had certain documents that looked like they were real, and he had a lot of departments that I had studied and people that I had studied their biographies, but all in a UFO context. And I thought, I want to find out. Is this real or is this not real? Is this just... And so I just went down that rabbit hole. That was 35 years ago. And yeah, it's real. Like, there is a phenomenon that is not supposed to exist officially. It absolutely does exist. The militaries of the world have been dealing with it. The United States military is very much on top of it. So anytime a DOD representative says, we'll let you know when we find out something, they're totally full of it because they absolutely know. You know, if a United States aircraft carrier is disabled for 20 plus minutes in the Caribbean or north of Puerto Rico, in 1971, and this happened, 20 minutes, weapons are down, communications are down. There's no way you're going to tell me that the President of the United States was not informed of that. There's no way you're going to tell me the Secretary of the Navy wasn't informed on this. They know when these objects come out of the water and they're glowing, and they're these big orange spheres, and you can't do a damn thing about it. They know. It's a real thing. They're interested in us. They check us out. And they've had to adapt to us as well, because we're not the same as we were a century ago. We're much more sophisticated, and I think there's a kind of dance that is going on between us and them. That's what I think.
All right, well, thank you, my friend, and we'll talk to you in the next episode. But I could go hours on this stuff, so
thank you.
Appreciate you. Thank you.
If you enjoyed today's video, please hit like and subscribe, and also hit the notification button so you can be notified whenever I post new content. Thank you. Now, if you're enjoying the channel and you want to support it, there are several things you can do. In fact, there are 5 things you can do. The first thing you can do is just buy my books. I got plenty of books out in the market right now, and I would prefer that folks buy a book rather than giving me direct support, because they get something out of it. They get a real tangible product. The second way you can support me is by becoming a member on YouTube or becoming a patron on Patreon. And just go to either site and it'll explain everything. The third way you can support the channel is by checking out my merch site, which is here. There's plenty of stuff that you can get to support the channel. And I'd appreciate that you have it and can wear it. Not only do you help support the channel, but you also help promote the channel, and I appreciate that. The fourth way that you can support the channel, and this is really easy, is anytime you want to buy something on Amazon, literally just go to the description below and click on any link, literally any link. The channel gets a cut of that, and it costs you no extra money. You just go through the link, as I'm part of the Amazon Affiliates Club. The fifth and final way you can support the channel is through donations. Now, I don't prefer these because it's more of an expression of gratitude, but you don't really get anything out of it as a subscriber to the channel. However, if you decide to do these options, there's 2 options. There's Buy Me a Coffee, which is a separate site, and there's also, you can go through YouTube with either a super chat, super sticker, or a super thanks. Again, I prefer Buy Me a Coffee because that organization takes less money than Amazon does. But either way, I appreciate any support you are willing to give the channel. So thank you very much, and keep watching. I really appreciate it.